Hey everyone, and welcome to the How to Teach Anything podcast, the show where we interview different instructors, coaches, and educators to see what we can learn about the art of teaching. My name is Matt Eiler, and I'll be your host as we discuss best practices to teach anything. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. Our guest today is James Thornock. He is the operations manager over at Coder Kids, which provides high-quality coding instruction for kids in grades K through 12. He's also a former public school teacher and a father of one with one on the way, which is super exciting. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing really great.
Excellent. We're so excited to have you here. Start off, could you tell us a little bit about what Coder Kids is, what they do, what your job is? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we are basically where your kids start their coding journey. And that's really exciting because coding is really exciting. It's an incredibly engaging topic. To a lot of parents, it seems like magic. To software developing parents, it doesn't seem that way anymore. But it's a spot for children to really dig in their teeth and really learn in a way that they've never learned before and create creatively. I know that's a little bit redundant, but they will do projects that will push them, that will give them fundamental coding knowledge that then can transfer to more adult languages like Python and Java and C++, things you can get a job in, right?
Sure.
And then we do private tutoring at kind of any level. So that's really what we do. We do in-person classes in Houston, but then we also do online classes. So you could be anywhere. We had people sign up from Belgium and Canada and Dubai and all sorts of places. And so, that's kind of in a nutshell what we do.
Awesome. Yeah. So I know there's a huge push in education with like STEM and, coding being kind of one of the pathways for jobs in the future. I mean, would you agree with that? As far as the importance of kids to learn coding nowadays? I mean, obviously you have a passion for it. But I think this is something that could really equip students in the future. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, just from to be hyper specific, right? Like I'm looking to hire a developer right now. And about 4 or 5 years ago, if you wanted to hire an international developer, you could hire a pretty good one for about $15 an hour. Not anymore. I mean, literally in the space of about 4 years, the international developer market, it's about $40 an hour now you have to pay. And that's like in India or Indonesia or somewhere else. I mean, so I'd say the floor has really risen for everybody globally, which is really, really great for workers. Yeah. And that's kind of the point. For people running businesses, that's tough because you have to figure out how to pay these people, but it really creates a lot of value inside of a company and having these skills, whether you're actually a coder or not, or whether you can just speak to the people building stuff, right? Building the apps, building the websites, working on databases, that kind of thing. It really helps with communication. And one of the number one problems in companies at large, and not to focus too much on the business world, but is communication, right? It's fairly easy. I mean, medium difficulty to find someone who has a specific skill set, but it's really hard to find someone who's got whatever skill set you're looking for. And then also is a really great communicator. They're totally, especially in coding, they're very separate skill sets. And so, that's kind of what companies are working for. So we try to work on both of those attributes.
Yeah. It's as you talk about, with education rather, you always talk about giving kids the tools they need to succeed. And with this being a growing market, I could absolutely see the importance of coding in the future and creating those workers for a new generation. But on the flip side of that, if I'm a teacher in the classroom and I teach, math or reading or science, what type of skills do you see you giving your students through coding that can help me as a teacher in a general education classroom?
Every subject is benefited by coding. And that's because to code is to write instructions for computers. Okay. The most fundamental level, that's what coding is. It's not more complicated than that. It can get complicated when you're talking about a specific language, or you're talking about putting a semicolon in the right place or something. And if you don't put the semicolon in the right place, then your whole program fails, right? But on a on a fundamental level, there are a couple of things that you learn in coding that are useful, like say in math, and that's sequential logic. You have to do the order of operations correctly, right? You have to make the meal before you sit down at the table and eat the meal. And then after that, then you've got to do the dishes. And like sequence really matters, because otherwise you'd be washing clean dishes, eating basically an empty plate, and then cooking just to throw it away. Right. So like sequence really matters. And the computer doesn't have it's not boxing with gloves. It's like it has to be exactly correct.
Yeah, it has to be very clean cut instructions.
Otherwise they will know, because the computer is like your smartest friend in terms of how much brain power, and your dumbest friend in the fact that it has no context, no contextual awareness whatsoever. And AI, is changing that, but AIs are typically developed for like one particular subject. So that's just the example for math. There are a couple other things you learn. So there's conditional logic, right? So this is what my mom taught me when I was, I don't know, like 12 years old. She said, if it's 5 p.m., then you come home, you wash your hands, you sit down to the table for dinner, right? I think I didn't have breakfast, so I'm using all these food analogies. But then
I like food. We could talk more about that.
if it's not 5 p.m., then you best stay out the kitchen, right? So that's the condition, is like, is it 5 p.m.? In a similar way, a computer checks for variables to see if they're true or false, and lots of other things as well. And so that conditional logic is really important. There's a side, so you'll also learn about coordinates, which is useful in math as well. But I do want to touch on some of the art stuff. So we typically use a program called Scratch, and this is developed by MIT. So kudos to them. We love MIT, and we support everything they do. I mean, they gave this gift of Scratch to the world basically for free. No, actually for free, not basically for free, actually. And it's really transformed the way kids learn. And one of the ways specifically is kids are able to, well, anybody, I mean, they don't check for age when you enter the site, but you can animate and you can color and you can bring your subjects to life. And so you have full artistic freedom. So we'll see students that are like really have the logic side down, and we try to push them on the creative side. And then we have students that just want to draw all day, and then we try to push them on the logic and the coding side. But really, coding, and whether it's video game creation or website creation, whatever we're working on, or Minecraft modding, we're trying to marry those two sides. We're trying to say your creativity is valuable and important and essential to making something actually fun and playable. And then on the other side, the coding, it's like, well, like the code has to be correct, otherwise it's just not going to work. Yeah. So if you have all the logic down, something will work, but not necessarily be fun. And then on the other side, you might have all the ideas in the world, and there's really cool stuff and maybe really pretty art, but it just doesn't function very well. And anybody who's a gamer knows that like there are lots of games that fit into these categories. It's like, well, it's an indie game, it's super beautiful, it's just not really fun. Yeah. And then you have on the other side, it's like programs you use for work that are, they function, but man, are they rough around the edges, and you have to know how to get around it. And then once in a blue moon, like just super rarely, you'll play a video game that's just like, it hits every level. It's creative, it's engaging, it helps you interact with your friends. It's,
Yeah,
it's
it's
got
funny.
that full creativity, but it's like properly designed and it functionally works. But those are like incredibly rare because they're really hard to marry those two skill sets. So
It's funny you mentioned that because I really am a big video game person, and I'm starting to teach my kids and that type of thing. And you're 100% right. I've played lots of games where it's like, wow, the art style is beautiful, but it sucks. Like it's just not a good game. And there's other games where like I can see what they're going for, but man, it looks rough around the edges. And I really like that idea you talked about the marriage of logic and creativity, because I think oftentimes in education we see those as very separate things, right? We see math and literature as two different topics. You know, we usually ask kids like, oh, what do you like better? Do you like math or do you like reading?
yeah.
And reading tends to be this very creative process, reading and writing in this beautiful art form, and math is considered kind of the more STEM, sterile.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is
Sterile is a good word. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
you're really
as
bringing the
far
two
as, yeah.
together. Yeah, you're bringing the
Oh,
two
yeah.
together, which is great.
Well, and that's the funny thing is like I'm not, right? Like I don't bring those together. They exist together already in the real world.
Sure.
We're just saying, hey, this is what exists in the real world. Like this is how you can actually learn. And that's the other thing is it's a different approach to education entirely. It's a project-based model, which is a Montessori model where you're trying to end up with an outcome and the outcome's not a grade, right? It's a project. It's something that can be put into a portfolio. So like, for example, my wife's a graphic designer. She's not a coder. And in college, one of the most important things she did was to put together a portfolio so she could get hired. And also because it looks pretty and it's really cool. You can go to larathornock.com and check it out. I mean, it's some fun stuff. Hasn't been updated in a while, but it's pretty, right? So in a similar way, we enable students to really like build their portfolio and try stuff out. I mean, the nice thing about starting in third grade or in first grade or in fifth grade, and look, if your child's in seventh grade, like it's not the end of the world. I know some parents act like it is, but you know, they don't have to support their family with coding income. Sure. And like being a coder in the real world, being a software engineer, they don't have to do that in seventh grade. And so starting when there's fairly low pressure lets them experiment and fail and like do that whole fail forward thing and see, hey, do I like this cycle where I encounter a problem, I come up with a solution, or I find the solution on the internet. I search up DuckDuckGo and then I find, there's a solution or something out there. And sorry, DuckDuckGo is like a search engine for those of you who don't know, that doesn't track your data. So I like to plug them. I don't get anything for it, but they just don't track your data. So that we like to just allow them this space to experiment and to practice and to fail and succeed, like, and build something. And then whatever they build, they get to keep forever. Right. Yeah. And that is incredibly satisfying. It doesn't work for all kids. I think one of the lines out there is that like coding is the future. And like, that's super vague. It's like, yeah, true, but vague. So I like to get specific. And then, people say, there's this line out there. It's like, coding is important for every job. And I just don't believe that. There are some people that it doesn't fit. Right. Sure. But in a similar way, like, in a very diminutive way, like I took karate when I was like 8 years old and, I didn't, become a black belt or anything. I don't think I belted at all. But it gave me appreciation for the, I don't know if you want to call it a sport or discipline or philosophy. It's like kind of a mix of those, right?
Yeah, so, definitely.
You're the expert on that one, but I feel like just trying it out, let me know, hey, could I be good at this and give it a real shot? And so I feel like every child should be able to be given a real shot at coding. See like, hey, does this jive? Does this work? And then there's like all kinds of different coders. You've got people that do websites, certainly video game designers, which a lot of kids want to be. I wanted to be didn't turn out for me. But I'll still make dinky little video games on the side, and that's kind of fun for me. And then there's database management for like big oil companies. I mean, there's so much that you could do. Yeah, like kind of sky's the limit. And so even if you don't fit into like one spot in coding, there's lots of others, but then maybe it doesn't fit, and that's fine. I don't want to say anything that's not exactly true. And coding, I feel like, is like for 98% of kids.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a very varied activity, and you just want to give kids as much experience as possible to dip their toes in the water. And like, I know with martial arts, that's absolutely true. Like there's some kids that just like, they're never going to love karate, and that's okay. But at least, you know, they've had the exposure to it, and you never know what impact you're going to leave on kids, which is great. You mentioned, you know, the building
impact.
Yeah.
That's like a bit of a, because like you're sparring, right? You don't want to
well, not that type of impact, let's hope.
Different kind of an impact. Yeah.
No. You mentioned building a portfolio, and
sure.
What is kind of like your curriculum? Do you have like a list of projects you pull from? Do you ask the kids what they want to do? If I come to you and I'm a fifth grader and I say I want to learn how to
sure.
code, what's kind of the process for me to start building that portfolio? How does your curriculum look?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'd be like, look, you're a fifth grader with a very deep voice, but we'll take you. It's like, are you really fifth grader? No, but yeah. So what we do is we've custom designed a curriculum. If you go to scratch.mit.edu and you click on create in the top left-hand corner, you're going to be met with something that's a little bit terrifying, which is a completely blank canvas. Like there's no direction, there's no guidance, there's no nothing. I think there's some like dinky little tutorials that you can do. Well, outside of that, like, you know, you'd have no idea how to do it. And so what we give is a little bit of structure to that, where we say, okay, here's the skeleton. This is what an example of what your project can look like. I just love specifics. Okay. So we have an asteroids clone. So for any kids of the 80s or 90s and remember asteroid, there's a ship in the middle, there's asteroids coming in, and you have to shoot the asteroids and break them up so they don't hit your ship. If they hit your ship, then you're dead and then the game's over, right? So pretty simple concept. It's one of the kids' favorite because they get to fly a spaceship around and do power-ups, and that's pretty cool. And so the skeleton says, you know, you got to have a ship. It's got to turn in multiple directions, and there's got to be asteroids kind of flying around, and the asteroids have to like hurt the main sprite or character, right? And that's kind of it. And then we have what's called differentiated learning. So this was hit on a ton while I was a public school teacher, and any public school teacher, you know, definitely my heart goes out to you, especially after COVID. Boy, that was brutal. I couldn't imagine. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine because we were teaching online classes at the same time, but not in the same way. And it was probably a lot easier than for public school teachers. So my heart always goes out to teachers in the, what I lovingly call this government school. Right. But yeah, so I definitely lost my train of thought there.
You said the differentiated learning.
Yeah. So differentiated learning, huge thing. Basically what that means in actual English is if you have one child that learns either faster or slower or differently than another student, which guess what is every single group of kids on the planet, we all learn slightly differently. That you have different levels of completion that are all acceptable and different kind of challenges to be able to be worked on. So the way that we have actually carried that out at Coder Kids is we have a base level to every project that, you know, if you complete this base level, then guess what? It's done. It's complete. You're good to go. You can move on to the next thing. But we also have something I think is interesting. We have 3 challenge levels. So we have challenge level 1, 2, and 3, and those will push them to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And what's interesting, and we kind of came across this the way we do it by accident, but essentially to get to the basic level of completion, we give them step-by-step instructions. We just use a slideshow so they can have it up at the same exact time. in front of them, and they can just kind of follow along and self-guide. We don't lecture at kids for more than 6 to 10 minutes. We have 6 to 10 minute lessons at the very beginning. We're operating in the fringes, right? We're operating at in after school normally, or in summer camp. Like, we're only operating during periods where kids want to have fun and they're not wanting to like put their nose to the grindstone. And so this was born out of necessity in the beginning, but we found that it's actually really effective. So kids, and I dare say full grown adults, don't have a lot of like storage space in their brains for things that they need to actively remember. And so what we do is we will show an example of a project. We will teach literally one or two very simple concepts, and then we'll let kids add it. Right. So then they're working for the majority of the class. They're experimenting. They're seeing what works. They're cheating off their friends. We can talk about that later. But then they're able to create in that period of time. And so I have to give the context. So that's the context, the backdrop, in which different students can be working on different projects, but there's curriculum for all of them, so they can see the bare bones for the basic level. And then those 3 challenge levels, sorry for jumping around back and forth, these challenge levels, we do not give you instructions about how to do those. We just say, create a power up. We don't say what kind of power up. It could affect the number of lives you have. It could affect like how fast your laser cannon shoots on your spaceship. It could affect if you have a shield or not. It could just be one that just shoots fireballs in every direction and destroys all asteroids. And I made that one. It's incredibly satisfying to set off. It's like really fun. And the great thing is that these kids come up with things that I've literally never thought of before. I designed this particular project, 3 years ago, and it's still cranking, and I still get new implementation from students. That kind of blows my mind. So yeah, we give them basic. We don't basis of what they should do. We don't leave them hanging out to dry. But when it comes to them being able to actually make their project their own, they can. And then that project goes into their portfolio. So that's kind of a bunch of things all at once. But I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's funny because one of the things, little side story, I mentioned my kids trying to start to play video games. And one of the things that people, when I was growing up, it was like, don't play video games, they'll rot your brain, that type of thing. I remember my parents saying that. Sure. And now with my kids, like my kids have learned to be better readers. They've learned logic from video games. And one of the things that's always been amazing to me is Minecraft. Because it's this sandbox where kids are given, kind of like what you said, some tools. But I remember I booted up Minecraft for the first time. Like, what do I do? Like, there's very little, if you're playing in this mode, there's very little instructions, and people create incredible things in that game. And it sounds very similar to what you're doing. You provide a basic sandbox, a structure with a few, a shovel and a whatever, a couple different tools, and the kids are really given free reign. Is it a collaborative process? Are they like working together a lot of the times, or picking each other's brains? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, this comes, right into what I mean when I say cheating. I mean, the way that software developers work, if you look at any kind of software developer memes, account on Instagram, they'll just the constant jokes about Stack Overflow and how people are like copying work. Okay. Like, it's known in the industry that professional people are copying and pasting code all the live long day. And so to tell these kids that they need to know every single block of code, and that they need to like memorize it and spit it out on like some standardized style test, is so backwards. We just don't even do it. In a Montessori model. And so a little bit more background, like we teach in private schools, public schools, charter schools, and like with homeschool groups. And there's a pretty big difference we find in Montessori schools and homeschool types and private schools and stuff. They're like, oh yeah, of course. But then public schools, it feels like, ooh, I'm doing something wrong to cheat and to like look at my neighbor's stuff.
Yeah.
And the difference is, so we say cheat because it gets them all riled up and they look sideways, and they're like excited that they get to break some rules. And then after we say that, and they kind of laugh a little bit, and their minds are kind of blown, we say, look, this is how real software developers do it. Now, when you copy and paste it, it's still important to understand what you pasted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, okay, well, this works. Why does this work? And so sometimes what we'll do is kind of the opposite of what you think, where we'd start with a completed project and then we break it. And then we see, okay, what was broken?
Mm.
In like construction, that was not, you wouldn't start with like a skyscraper and like punch out windows. We're like, hey, what happened? It's
That's
like
another thing that would get you
windows.
sued. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the nice thing is like there's no cost associated with starting one way or the other. And so we're able to do both. Well, sometimes we'll start from nothing and then build up. And then sometimes we'll start with a completed project and say like, all right, like let's break stuff and see what's broken. And both are like essential tools for learning. Again, for anyone who knows the dreaded word debugging, or finding glitches or playtesting, like it's really tedious and tough work, but you need to figure out how to fix things that you think are already complete, right?
Yeah.
Like this is why your phone has updates. Like it is never done. There's always stuff broken and you need to figure out how to do it. And so that's a skill that we work on. And so to answer your question, is it collaborative or not? Absolutely. All of coding is on a professional level even. And the funny thing is like Stack Overflow, right? It's like free. Like people are posting unreal amounts of code in the real world scot-free. And they figured out that they need it so bad. They need like that they have such a need of code and expertise that they kind of buy into the system where they say like, all right, well, I'm going to post mine because it's going to be beneficial for other people. It's a strange kind of manifestation where there's many times not a financial incentive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a strange thing, but that's how the industry works. And so we want to try to mimic that whenever possible.
That's really cool, because we talked a lot about logic, we talked a lot about creativity, but here's kind of like, this third facet of like this moral lesson and this betterment of the world kind of in a way, because now you're able to help each other. And ultimately, I mean, I think with the way STEM is looking in the education system and the job market, that's going to be a big area, in the next 10 years. It already is. And so the idea that, not only are you creating these people that can do this, but also these people that have an understanding of how are we going to make the world the best place possible through sharing resources and that type of thing. I don't know. That's just a moral aspect that I really appreciate in what you're talking about. And I think a lot of teachers could learn from, which is why we do this show, because I think there's absolutely something that you could see there. To start wrapping up, one of the things I like to do is just, quick 2 minutes. What is your favorite thing to teach? Do you have a favorite drill, activity? Like if I said, you've got half-hour lesson, teach me something, what is your favorite thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love doing clicker games. It's the fastest way to anybody who's ever played cookie clicker. Like they're terrible games to play. Like don't waste your time. But they're really fun to teach because you can take a student within a period of about 10 to 15 minutes and they can have a working functional game. And that just flicks on the light bulb for them. Mm-hmm. They see, hey, like I can build stuff. I can do stuff. I don't just have to play video games made by Microsoft or Nintendo or Activision or Blizzard or whoever else is going to get free advertising from this podcast. but like I can make stuff and I can share it with my friends. And then it's just like, it blows their mind because what's happening in their mind is, oh, wait, I can do this. I can make my own game and share this. Well, what if I made this type of game? Or what if I made this type of game? It's like, well, then in that type of game, I could do this, or this. Mm-hmm. Could I do power-ups this way? Could I make it look like my little brother has his hair on fire? I totally could. Yeah. And then teacher, can I make this like hyper specific game? Insert this idea of like, my little brother's hair is on fire and you have to like go to the fire hydrant and like, I don't know, spray his hair out or something. I totally just made that up. So that's no child has ever said that. So
someone's gonna make it now, you know.
Yeah. I will buy that game, by the way. So just if you make it. And they just see the possibility in their own life of what they could potentially do with a little bit more skill. Yeah. And that is what I love to see, because that light bulb just goes off. And as a teacher, you know, those moments are, you know, light bulb moments, but those are moments when like you can see it in the eyes, you can see it in their entire body, right? They're just like, oh, I can do this stuff. I hate this word in the context of 2022, but it's empower. Like I just hate it. It's so overused. But in this case, I think it's true, because they gain an ability, they gain a skill, and they gain knowledge of what they could become in the future. Yeah. And to me, it's just kind of the fastest path to get to that realization. And once they have that realization, they can develop a little more patience. They can develop a little more skill to kind of do the rest of stuff. So
yeah, that's awesome. You know, it's funny. You probably know this already, but you know, for some of our listeners who don't, it's empowering because, you know, this is a real thing that happens in the real world. I think about, you know, you mentioned indie games earlier, and I can think of multiple games that were created by like a team of one, maybe two people. And now they're like, Undertale comes to mind with Toby Fox. And, you know, he's this guy that created this game, and now it's like he has like some of his music and characters in like Smash Brothers, which is like a Nintendo franchise.
Yeah, that blew my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, you know, what you talk about with these people coming up with, I got an idea, and this kind of branching tree of, well, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. That is a very real world opportunity that is able for young people to enjoy in the future, and maybe even make a career out of. So it sounds like you're giving them some really, really great tools all around the board. I loved our conversation today, especially the logic and creativity and kind of how you teach. That's great. I really, really appreciate it. Great conversation. Well, James, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here and teaching us a little bit about teaching. To our listeners, don't forget to check out Coder Kids for more information on their coding classes, which are offered online and in person in the Houston area. You can also find them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you so much, James, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you to all our listeners who are tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you're looking for more How to Teach Anything content, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest updates about upcoming episodes and more teachers' tips. My name is Matt Eiler. You've been listening to the How to Teach Anything podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.